Hi everyone, how's it going? My name is Sergio and welcome to the second episode in the Anima2D Spring Bones tutorial series. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to transform these boring and standard bones into really cool and dynamic spring bones, as we saw in the example. So the first thing we're going to need is a component called Spring Manager. This component will be attached to the character game object, so let's go ahead and select it. After that, you want to click on Add Component, type Spring in the search box, and select the Spring Manager. Before we get started, let's go ahead and talk about the properties we're going to be using today. The first one is the stiffness force. The stiffness will determine how rigid and hard those bones are going to be. So basically, the more stiffness we have applied to them, the harder it is going to be for them to move when the character is bobbing his head or jumping up and down. We also have a stiffness curve, which will allow us to define a curve which is gonna manage how the stiffness force is gonna be applied to those bones. We also have something called drag force. The drag force will determine how quickly those bones will go back to their natural or idle position. That natural or idle position is going to be defined inside of the bones themselves. Then we also have a drag curve. The drag curve is the same as the stiffness force, only it will affect the drag. Then we also have the spring bones list, and that list is going to allow us to add all of the spring bones that we have inside our game character, so that then they can be managed by this script, and therefore the system will work. So before we change the properties in this script, let's go ahead and add the spring bones script to the actual bones that we want to change. If for you it was the case that you had these bones all closed in the hierarchy, there's a quicker way to open them up. To do so, you just have to hold down the Alt key and then click on the arrow on the left of the bones game object. That will open up everything that's inside of it. So next, what you want to do is to select from front ribbon 1 all the way down to back ribbon 4, click on Add Component, and select Spring Bone. This is the script that makes these boring and standard bones become spring bones. But they also have a few different properties that we haven't seen yet. So let's go ahead and start from the top. The radius will only be affected, or rather, the radius will only matter if you had a spring collider attached to this bone. Since we're not going to be covering colliders in this tutorial, we're just going to skip that. The next property is use each bone force settings, although the name is not very clear. What it means is, if you have this checkbox selected, the stiffness force that we have down here and the drag force that are down here will not be overridden by the spring manager. So if I was to define a stiffness of 1 and a drag of 1 in the manager, and I don't have this checkbox selected, those values will be overridden by the manager. If I have it selected, they will stay how they are. You can obviously change those parameters to whatever number you want. Then next we have the spring force, which will determine that idle or natural position I was talking about earlier. Then we also have a list of colliders. This again we're not going to cover in this tutorial, and neither the threshold. We also have isAnimated, which is a boolean that basically defines or tells the script if you have animated any of these bones inside of an animator. If that is not the case and you have not created any animation in which you are defining some values for these bones, do not check that. Okay, so with that all added to the game objects, we can go ahead and save the scene, and let's start tweaking a little bit the spring manager. The first thing we want to tweak is the stiffness force. So let's go ahead and set that to 0.001. For the curve, we're gonna set that to a flat curve. Then for the drag force, we're gonna set that to 0.4. For the drag curve, again, is gonna be the flat preset. The next thing is filling up this spring bones list. Otherwise, the spring manager is not gonna do anything and the spring bones are not gonna move. So to fill up that list, let's go ahead and lock the inspector and then select all the spring bones. So from front ribbon 1 all the way down to back ribbon 4, and drag that onto the spring bones list. You should have 8 bones. After that, we can just close the list and unlock the inspector. With that said, let's go ahead and click play and see what happens. As you can see, we do have some movement already in the bones. However, if I move the head, you will notice that these bones are moving very slowly and are not affected by any kind of gravity. So something to keep in mind is that these bones will never be affected by gravity the same way that a rigid body would be affected by the gravity of the Unity physics engine. However, with the spring force parameter, we can create the illusion of gravity. So to do so, let's go ahead and select from front ribbon 1 all the way down to front ribbon 4 and set the X value to -0.001 and the Y value to -0.01. For the back ribbons, the X value is going to stay the same, so select from front back ribbon 1 to back ribbon 4 and set the X value to -0.001 and the Y value to -0.02. If you save the scene and hit play, now those bones will fall down and they're gonna behave the way we want them to. Now something I'm noticing is that these back ribbons are actually in front of the body. So let's go ahead and fix that. To do so, let's select ribbon back and move it to the ordering layer of 0. Save the scene and hit play again. And there it goes. We can now see that these ribbons or these pieces of cloth are behaving just like we want them to. So if we were to animate this character and he was maybe jumping, when he was falling down, you would see the cloth go up and down very naturally. Then again, these bones are not affected by gravity, but the cool thing about it is that since we set the spring force like this, they look as if they were. The reason we have set different Y values for the spring force is because if I was to set the same value, they would be one in front of the other, so we wouldn't be able to see the second one. So let's take a look at how the stiffness and the drag actually make those bones behave differently. So let's make a small change in the stiffness from the value we have set before to 0.005. And now if we move the head, you'll see that they're way more rigid. They don't look like pieces of cloth anymore. They look like as if they had a piece of rock attached to the bottom, so they kind of swing with a very rigid behavior. Let's set that back to 0.001. And to illustrate the drag, let's change that to 0.8. Now as you can see, they swing. There's not much of a difference actually. This is probably not the best way to illustrate this, but maybe if I was to change the Y to positive 0.02, we can see that the drag affects those bones by the lower the drag is, the quicker it's gonna go to that natural position we have set. So this is very cool for creating various effects and for very many different applications. So basically that was it for the whole tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more and practice more with spring bones, I have created another scene inside of the tutorial folder and the scene folder called flower. I will be uploading in a couple of days another video in which I explain how the flower scene is set up, so that if you're playing around with it and you don't understand how it works, you can watch that video and play around and see how everything goes together. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it was helpful. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them in the comments down below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.